Akagi was one of the earliest and most important fleet aircraft carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy and played a central role in shaping Japan's carrier warfare doctrine during World War II. Originally laid down as a battlecruiser, Akagi was converted into an aircraft carrier under the limitations imposed by naval treaties, resulting in a large and powerful carrier optimized for offensive air operations. By the late 1930s, Akagi became a core unit of Japan's first air fleet, capable of launching large, coordinated airstrikes over long distances. Its flight deck, hangar system, and aircraft handling layout were designed to prioritize rapid launch and recovery of aircraft rather than heavy armor protection. Akagi served as the flagship during early war operations, including major carrier strikes in the Pacific, where its air group demonstrated the effectiveness of massed naval aviation. However, its limited defensive protection and internal vulnerabilities reflected Japanese doctrine, which emphasized striking first rather than surviving prolonged engagements. Akagi ultimately represents the rise of carrier-based warfare and the risks of prioritizing offensive power over survivability. Kaga was one of the most important fleet aircraft carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy and a cornerstone of Japan's early carrier strike doctrine during World War II. Originally designed as a battleship, Kaga was converted into an aircraft carrier following naval treaty limitations, resulting in a large, heavily built carrier optimized for offensive aviation rather than defensive protection. Kaga played a decisive role in early Pacific operations, where its aircraft demonstrated the effectiveness of carrier-based air power against surface fleets and shore targets. However, like many Japanese carriers, Kaga lacked sufficient internal compartmentalization and damage control capability, making it vulnerable once hit. Kaga represents both the peak of early Japanese naval aviation success and the structural weaknesses that later proved fatal in sustained carrier warfare. Soryu was a purpose-built fleet aircraft carrier of the Imperial Japanese Navy and represented a shift away from converted warship hulls toward more specialized carrier design. Commissioned in the late 1930s, Soryu was smaller and faster than earlier carriers like Akagi and Kagi, reflecting Japan's desire for carriers that could operate aggressively within fast-moving strike groups. Its compact hull and powerful machinery allowed it to keep pace with cruisers and destroyers, making it well-suited for coordinated fleet operations. Soryu's flight deck and internal hangar arrangement were optimized for efficient aircraft handling and rapid launch cycles, reinforcing Japan's doctrine of delivering overwhelming first strikes. While less heavily built than converted carriers, Soryu emphasized speed, offensive air power, and tactical flexibility. However, this focus came at the cost of limited armor protection and damage control, leaving the ship vulnerable once hit. Soryu symbolizes Japan's move toward modern carrier design and highlights the strengths and risks of prioritizing speed and striking power in carrier warfare. Iryu was a refined evolution of the Soryu design and one of the most distinctive fleet aircraft carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy during World War II. Built as a purpose-designed carrier, Hiryu incorporated lessons learned from earlier ships, emphasizing improved aircraft handling efficiency and operational flexibility within a compact hull. One of its most recognizable features was its island superstructure placed on the port side, rather than the starboard, a deliberate experiment intended to improve flight deck operations and airflow management. Iryu was fast, maneuverable, and optimized for aggressive carrier strike tactics, fitting seamlessly into Japan's doctrine of massed aerial attacks launched from coordinated carrier groups. Like its contemporaries, Hiryu prioritized offensive air power over armor protection, leaving it vulnerable to sustained damage once hit. Despite these limitations, Hiryu demonstrated the effectiveness of Japanese carrier doctrine in the early stages of the war and stands as a symbol of innovation, speed, and the risks inherent in carrier warfare focused on striking first. Shokaku was one of the most advanced and capable fleet aircraft carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy and represented the peak of Japanese carrier design before and during the early years of World War II. Purpose-built from the keel up as an aircraft carrier, Shokaku incorporated lessons learned from earlier ships, featuring improved structural strength, better aircraft handling arrangements, and increased operational flexibility. Compared to older carriers, Shokaku had a larger and more efficient flight deck and hangar system, allowing it to operate a substantial air group while maintaining high speed and endurance. The ship was designed to support sustained carrier operations, making it well-suited for extended campaigns across the Pacific. Although still prioritizing offensive air power over heavy armor protection, Shokaku benefited from improved compartmentalization and damage control relative to earlier Japanese carriers. Its design reflected Japan's mature understanding of carrier warfare, balancing speed, striking power, and operational efficiency more effectively than previous generations. Zuikaku was one of the most important fleet aircraft carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy and a sister ship to Shokaku, sharing the same advanced design philosophy that represented the peak of Japanese carrier development in the early years of World War II. Built as a purpose-designed carrier, Zuikaku combined high speed, a large and efficient flight deck, and well-organized hangar spaces that allowed it to operate a powerful air group over extended distances. Together with Shokaku, Zuikaku formed the most capable carrier pair in Japan's fleet, surviving early battles that destroyed many older carriers. Its design emphasized operational endurance and sustained flight operations rather than heavy armor, reflecting Japan's continued focus on offensive air power. Despite suffering heavy aircraft and pilot losses as the war progressed, Zuikaku remained in service until the final stages of the conflict, making it a symbol of both Japan's early carrier dominance and the gradual erosion of its naval aviation strength due to attrition, resource shortages, and declining pilot quality. Taiho was the most technologically advanced fleet aircraft carrier completed by the Imperial Japanese Navy during World War II and represented a significant departure from earlier Japanese carrier design philosophy. Unlike previous carriers that emphasized offensive power with minimal protection, Taiho incorporated armored flight deck sections, improved internal compartmentalization, and enhanced damage control features, reflecting hard lessons learned from earlier losses. Built to operate modern heavier aircraft and sustain prolonged combat operations, Taiho was intended to restore Japanese carrier survivability while maintaining offensive capability. Its design featured a fully enclosed hangar system and more robust structural protection than any earlier Japanese carrier. However, despite these advancements, Taiho remained vulnerable due to inadequate damage control practices and design compromises related to ventilation and fuel handling. The ship's short operational career highlighted the critical gap between advanced engineering concepts and effective operational execution. Taiho stands as Japan's last true attempt to create a survivable modern fleet carrier capable of matching Allied designs in the evolving carrier war. Unryu was the lead ship of a late-war class of fleet aircraft carriers, built by the Imperial Japanese Navy in an attempt to rapidly replace catastrophic carrier losses suffered earlier in World War II. Based broadly on the proven Shokaku design but simplified to speed construction, Unryu reflected Japan's shifting priorities as industrial capacity, skilled labor, and materials became increasingly scarce. While capable of operating modern aircraft, the ship lacked the refined damage control systems and survivability features of earlier fleet carriers. Unryu was designed primarily for homeland defense and late-war contingency operations rather than extended offensive campaigns. Although its overall layout and flight operations were competent, severe shortages of trained pilots, aircraft, and fuel meant that Unryu never operated at full potential. The carrier stands as a clear representation of Japan's late-war naval strategy, technically sound in concept, but constrained by time, resources, and the rapidly deteriorating strategic situation. Amaji was a late-war fleet aircraft carrier of the Imperial Japanese Navy, built as part of the Unryu-class program intended to rapidly rebuild Japan's carrier strength after devastating losses earlier in World War II. Derived from the proven Shokaku design but simplified for faster construction, Amaji reflected the severe constraints facing Japanese shipbuilding by 1944, including shortages of materials, skilled labor, fuel, and aircraft. While its overall layout supported modern carrier operations, Amaji lacked the refined damage control systems, armor protection, and operational readiness that defined earlier fleet carriers. The ship was intended primarily for homeland defense rather than long-range offensive operations, and it never reached full combat effectiveness due to Allied air superiority and strategic bombing. Amaji's incomplete operational career and eventual destruction before meaningful deployment symbolized the collapse of Japan's carrier-based naval strategy and the inability of late-war construction efforts to reverse the tide of the conflict. Katsuragi was one of the final fleet aircraft carriers completed by the Imperial Japanese Navy during World War II and a sister ship of homage within the Unryu-class program. Built under severe late-war constraints, Katsuragi reflected Japan's urgent need to replace lost carriers while coping with material shortages, damaged shipyards, and diminishing industrial capacity. Although based on the Shokaku design lineage, Katsuragi incorporated numerous simplifications intended to accelerate construction rather than enhance combat survivability. The carrier was structurally sound and capable of operating modern aircraft, but like other late-war carriers, it suffered from a lack of trained pilots, aircraft, fuel, and operational opportunities. Katsuragi never participated in major carrier battles and spent most of its service life in defensive and training roles near the Japanese home islands. After the war, the ship was repurposed for repatriation duties, underscoring its limited combat legacy. Katsuragi stands as a representation of Japan's final carrier construction efforts, competent in design, but rendered strategically ineffective by the broader collapse of naval aviation infrastructure.